Anthony couldn't comprehend why his son, Mike, was coming home hungry every day. Whenever they sent him to school, he had a lunchbox with him, and there should have been enough in it to ensure the little boy stayed full. To make matters worse, little Mike seemed terrified when his parents questioned him about it. Anthony was worried about the situation and decided to approach the school to find out if they knew what was happening. But the principal was just as unaware of what was happening as Anthony was. They decided to take another approach and questioned Mike's classmates. The other students told them that Mike never brought lunch from home. This information shocked Anthony to his core. He was confused by the fact that the other students were under the assumption that Mike didn't have food because the family was poor. He thought something must have happened in the hallway or while Mike was going to school. He addressed his concerns with the principal, who offered to help him find the truth. When Mike was called out of class and asked about the food, he started crying, which made his parents feel even worse. But he didn't offer up any information. It was the teacher who came in next that gave them a clue. She told Anthony and the principal that there was a new substitute teacher who was acting odd whenever he was near Mike. The principal immediately called the substitute teacher, Clive, into his office. And when he saw Anthony sitting there, his demeanor changed. The principal confronted Clive about Mike and his situation, but Clive said he had no idea what they were talking about. However, his act wasn't as convincing as he believed it was. The principal asked to speak to Clive privately, and Anthony agreed. But his suspicions about Clive were confirmed when another teacher, who had come in to comfort Anthony, told him that she felt Clive was up to something. It was clear that Anthony had to act right away, but things didn't go as well as he hoped they would. When Anthony was called back into the principal's office, the atmosphere had shifted. The principal informed Anthony that he couldn't do anything about the situation because they had no evidence. Since Mike refused to tell them what was happening and Clive insisted that he knew nothing, their hands were tied. The pair agreed that and it all had to do with his son's teacher. He worried about the well-being of his son, just as any parent should. Why was his son keeping secrets from him? His lunch was missing every day, and he knew the teacher had something to do with it. He knew that he had to think of something quickly for the sake of his son. That's when Anthony began devising a plan. He had to think of something sneaky if he wanted to learn the truth surrounding his son's circumstances. He started with the principal. Maybe he could help him after all. Anthony was going to take his suspicions to the highest authority at the school. He knew that if he at least made the principal aware of the situation, something might come of it all. He had to at least try. What kind of father would he be if he didn't look out for his son's well-being? He'd find out soon enough what stance the principal was willing to take. Anthony made his way into the principal's office despite his assistant telling him he needed an appointment. He walked over to the principal sitting in his chair and definitely surprised him. Before the principal could say anything, Anthony said, "Hi, I'm sure you recognize me. I'm Michael's father. I have some complaints about a teacher." Anthony explained everything he suspected to the principal. He looked concerned but then shook his head. Clearly, something was wrong. The principal looked Anthony dead in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry, there's not much that I can do without any evidence." Anthony felt his blood begin to boil. Would he really do nothing? Anthony stormed out of the office with nothing. The principal wouldn't budge on needing evidence. He decided that he would have to take matters into his own hands. If the principal wanted evidence, well, then Anthony would gather up whatever evidence was needed. But he knew he wouldn't be doing things by the book. Anthony was fuming as he went home, but he was already formulating a plan in his head. He knew exactly what would help his son, but he knew it would be very risky. He couldn't think of any other way to go forward. He wished he could have done things differently, but it was already too late. It would have to be a sneaky way of doing things if he wanted to go forward. The next day, Anthony was ready to go forward with his plan. While his son was getting ready for school, he slipped something small into the front pouch of his backpack. His son came down the stairs and ate breakfast before they left together to go to school. Anthony dropped him off, smiling to himself for his shrewdness. The teacher's secret would finally be out. Anthony had put a recording device in his son's backpack. He'd be able to record the entire interaction between his son and the teacher. After dropping him off, he made his way to work. While at work, all that Anthony knew he could do was wait. His boss even asked him why he was smiling the entire time, but it was because he knew that he'd soon have the teacher begging for mercy. Later that day, Anthony picked up Mike from school and deftly swiped the recorder back from the backpack. He asked his son how his day was, but yet again, he looked sad. That's when Anthony knew that he was doing the right thing. He took out the recorder and played it back, but when he heard the conversation between his son and his teacher, he knew what he had to do. Anthony called the principal and organized a meeting the next day. He explained that he had the evidence that would break the case wide open. Now all Anthony had to do was wait for that meeting. He was now as smug as ever and would ensure that the teacher's secret would be out. His son would end up begging him not to, but what kind of father could he be without protecting his son? The next day, after school, Anthony sat with Mike and the principal in his office. After waiting for 5 minutes, Clive, the teacher, came in as well. He looked surprised, as if he had no idea what was coming. Anthony smiled in satisfaction and asked the important question, "Should I play the recording for you, Principal?" Anthony got permission and started playing the recording. He watched the teacher go pale as he heard his voice come up on the recorder. He could tell that all the blood had drained from his face. Finally, he would get what was coming to him for what he had done with his son. Anthony just sat back in satisfaction. Everyone couldn't believe what they heard. They heard Mike giving his lunch to Clive, but then they heard him calling up another boy. Clive then handed the food to the other child. After a second of confusion, Mike explained what was going on to the principal, but it would be the ultimate twist. Mike finally told everyone in the room the secret. He had collaborated with his teacher to give one of his classmates his lunch every day. This was because the child was too poor to afford his own lunch. Mike was happy to give up his food for a less fortunate student, and Clive was proud of him for doing so. Mike was embarrassed and didn't want anyone to know, but from then on, Anthony packed his son 2 lunches. In order to protect the privacy of those depicted, Some names, locations, and identifying characteristics have been changed and are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblances to actual events, places, or persons, living or dead, are entirely coincidental.